You're listening to The Bible Guys, a podcast where a couple of friends talk about the Bible in fun and practical ways.
Welcome back to another episode of The Bible Guys. I'm Jeff.
And I'm Kyle.
Today we have Kyle with us. Yeah, that's right.
Jump right in there.
Chris Zarbaugh is out of the studio.
Okay.
He's out running around.
Just living his best life?
Yeah, living his best life, I guess.
That sounds about right.
No, he's with his dad.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they're doing like a boy, not a boys. I was going to say a boys road trip. Boys
That's
road
fun.
trip. But yeah,
that's awesome.
So I'll let Chris tell all about that when he gets back. But
that's great.
So anyways, we have the inimitable Kyle Daubenmeier with us today.
Thank you so much.
Right?
Yes.
The inestimable.
Oh, my goodness.
Right.
Inestimable.
Kyle Daubenmeier. He's with us today. And I always look forward to having you in the studio because you've been with Zarbaugh a couple times.
Yep. Yeah,
but
the last,
I haven't had a chance to be in the studio with you for a while.
I was excited when I got scheduled. They haven't asked me in a while, so I'm not really sure, what happened. I know that the directors are tough.
Yeah, I think that we were questioning the output from the last time.
Yes.
But you didn't have much to work with, you and Zarbaugh. So, I figured, well, let's give you a shot and you can be on my side.
There we go.
And it'll be way better.
Yes, you'll carry me, and we'll just see how this goes.
Yeah, that's. I don't carry you, so I don't even carry myself. Well, hey, we have a very strong commitment on this podcast to bringing only the finest news.
That's right.
To our listeners from the finest sources.
Of course.
And especially when you get into election season and when you get into all this time, you just don't know what news you can trust. And so we feel like maybe the best source on the entire internet is the Babylon Bee.
Absolutely.
And so, and if you don't know, the Babylon Bee is an entirely satire website, but we think it's as accurate as anything else.
Absolutely.
So this is useful information for parenting.
It is. Yeah, today is actually called The Best Ways to Embarrass Your Teenager.
Embarrass your teenager. Okay.
And for me, I have a 14-year-old and an 11-year-old. So this is very fitting.
Perfect.
And your daughter just got out of the teenage phase,
Yeah, that's right. My kids are all out of their teens now.
You can relate to this too, I'm sure. But this is good. This is good advice. Make sure, as you're hearing this, whether you're driving, just mark this down in your head as like a note. Or if you're actually just watching this, write down some notes, or you can look up the article later. This is very important. This is what it says. If you're the proud owner of a kid between the ages of 12 and 20,
proud owner,
you know that the teenage years are the most socially sensitive time any child ever goes through, which I agree. Teenagers have the capacity to be embarrassed by literally anything you say or do. Some parents worry about this. But did you realize just how great a comedic opportunity you've been given here? We at the Babylon Bee have painstakingly compiled a knockout list of absolutely killer ways to mortify your teen.
Excellent.
Yes.
Yeah.
Check it out. Here's the list. Ready? Number 1, speak.
Yeah.
We're starting.
Just say any word.
Yeah. And it says we're starting with the easy ones here. Number 2. Here's how you can embarrass your kids is to exist. Your teen will never live this down. 3 is to breathe. Ew, gross. What's wrong with you?
Yeah.
Number 4, I can relate to this one. Take them on a family vacation where they will make lifelong memories they can cherish forever.
That's right.
And then the note on that says the teens think that this is cringe. Number 5 is to be the president. That's a way to embarrass them, is to be the president.
Okay, be the president.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay. I don't know
Number 6 is mistakenly fall in love with them when they travel back in time in a modified DeLorean and bump into you when you're a teenager. That is odd, right?
That's the story.
Back to the Future.
That's the story of the Back to the Future. There you go.
Awkward. Yep. Yeah. Number 7, when checking them in at the doctor's office, loudly state the reason for their visits. That's good. And then it says make sure to spell out your teen's middle name so that nobody misspells it too.
I brought my son, Junior. He's really constipated.
That's good. Number 8, say hello to their friends. That's very mortifying for them.
That's horrible.
Yes, adults saying hello to teenagers is an unforgivable social
creepy.
Faux pas. Yep.
That's right.
And by the way, side note, I was picking my daughter up from cheer a few weeks ago, and then she had a friend that was walking by. She goes, "Oh, this is so-and-so." She goes, "You should honk at her." And she was joking, but I honked at her because she said to honk at her.
Oh, no.
And she was embarrassed.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, so, I'm learning right there. Apparently I shouldn't say hello to her friends.
Yeah.
Number 9, another thing we can do to embarrass them is to serve them dinner because the food at our house is gross, Dad.
It's gross.
Yep,
That's right. If it's not handed out the window or over a counter in a wrapper, it's gross.
There you go. Yep. Exactly. DoorDash. Yep. Wear your most functional pair of cargo shorts.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then it says that it works best when paired with calf-length white crew socks and some nice flip-flops.
Nice.
So basically a nice dad outfit to wear. Number 11, hold your menu upside down and loudly ask for one printed right side up. It says your comedic genius will have your teen in tears of laughter.
Okay.
And then lastly, drop some Gen Z lingo on them, fam. They'll think you're bussin', no cap. Oh, wow. That's good. There you go. So that's pretty much it. Those are the 12 ways to embarrass your kids and mortify them.
There you go.
That's really good.
That's super useful stuff.
It's helpful.
Super useful. I think most of those are instinctive.
Yes.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Which one do you feel like is most useful to you?
Most useful? I would say for me, currently it's the saying hello to their friends.
Yes.
Because I think back in, I would be fine. Like I'd want to go talk to their friends. And now I'm realizing like in certain environments, I'm allowed to talk to their friends. Other environments, just stay away. Dad, you're not cool. So stay away.
Yeah. And it's hard to navigate. Is this the good environment or the bad environment?
Right.
Is this appropriate or not appropriate? Yeah.
Or the appropriate hour of the day, right?
Yeah.
Like when to do that. Because it could change daily and moods and all that.
My daughter in particular was very sensitive to where we pulled up at the school.
Yeah.
Like if I had to drop her off, that was terribly embarrassing.
Okay, yeah.
Right. But she also didn't want to drive to school.
Yeah.
Right. So there's that. So what door? And the door I dropped her off last week was not okay to drop her off this week.
It changed.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. All those things. Waving at friends. I thought they were friends. They're not friends anymore.
Okay.
Whatever. All that stuff.
Okay.
It was tough.
Well, I just remember growing up, though, just going back to this real quick, for teenagers, my dad would drop us off at school and he'd be blaring some 80s music and just could care less.
He's a cool dad.
Yeah, I'm trying to open the door. Yeah, exactly. He was a cool, yeah. And it's funny now because here I am and I'm like doing the same thing. I'm like, what's wrong? This is good music.
That's great. Well, it's super useful stuff. And we're always trying to help our listeners. And so
parents,
that's just about as good as it gets right there. Yep. Just existing is offensive to your children.
Yep.
Well, so we have an exceedingly difficult challenge in front of us today with regard to our conversation, because for some reason, and I'm not going to put it on Des entirely because I was the one who helped work out all of these things, but I'm not sure how we divided 12 verses on the death of Moses into 2 different episodes.
It's that epic.
Yeah. So we're at the end of the book of Deuteronomy. We're also at the end of the life of Moses. And we're going to try to get a lot out of these 12 verses. So today we're only reading the first, 4?
Yep. First 4, yep.
Is that correct? Okay.
That's correct.
So let me clear my voice. I should have gotten some water or something, man. Here we go. It says, then Moses went up to Mount Nebo from the plains of Moab and climbed Pisgah Peak, which is across from Jericho. And the Lord showed him the whole land from Gilead as far as Dan, all of the land of Naphtali, the land of Ephraim and Manasseh, all the land of Judah extending to the Mediterranean Sea, the Negev, the Jordan Valley with Jericho, the city of palms, as far as Zoar. Then the Lord said to Moses, this is the land I promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob when I said, I will give it to your descendants. I have now allowed you to see it with your own eyes, but you will not enter the land.
Yeah.
So have you been in Israel?
No, I have not.
No.
Not yet.
So this is near the top of the Dead Sea. So if you remember, the Sea of Galilee is at the northern end of Israel. Above that is where he talks about Dan. Is up that way. Okay. And then above that would be Lebanon and Syria is up above the Sea of Galilee. Then you come down the river Jordan, and that's in a valley all the way down. And so then Mount Nebo, which I remember seeing Mount Nebo, is at the top, right at the top of the Dead Sea. And right across the river is where Jericho would be. Then it goes up a hill, and then Jerusalem is up high like that. So it really is it's a very tall, for that region, a tall mountain. And it's not very far. You're only looking like 90 miles top to bottom, right? Yeah. So Israel's not a very big country. And he can see all the promised land from that spot. So it's a pretty incredible moment. Beautiful to see.
I'm sure.
But, there's also the other side you're not going to go in, which we have to reserve that for tomorrow. So we can't talk too much about that. But
I do think it's interesting though, how it talks about how, Moses was the only person to see God face to face, right? God called him a friend. And yet at the same time, his disobedience, caused him to get to that point where he was able to see it, but not actually enter it. Yeah. And yet still, I think it's a tricky thing, because I think a lot of times people want to wonder, or they think that there are certain things that should be fair. Like, why would God do that to Moses? He's been your friend. And never once did God say, to change his friendliness towards Moses. He stayed close and all this stuff, but just said, hey, because you disobeyed, you're not able to enter. I think that's a pretty challenging perspective when you look at that. Because I know as a human, you kind of, again, you think, that's not fair. Like, he should be allowed,
Well, there's a lot to be done here. Mm-hmm. So Moses was 40 years old when and we didn't really cover this in the podcast, but he is now an adult in Pharaoh's court. He's also starting to really identify with his Hebrew background.
Yeah.
And he sees a slave driver working for the Pharaoh. He sees him beating a Hebrew, and Moses gets mad, picks up a weapon or something and kills this guy, and then buries him in the sand. Then he takes off. He runs and he hides out in the desert for 40 years. Literally, the Bible says on the backside of the desert. Very likely, most of that time, if not all that time, would have been in the Sinai Peninsula, because this is an area that he was familiar with when he gets back there, when God gives him the Ten Commandments. So then that's 40 years. Then he has this moment, this incredible God moment. He was raised in Pharaoh's home. He very likely, he was the son of the princess, very likely would have been in the line of succession as a pharaoh, right? He would have had the finest educations, the finest clothes, the finest everything. He was very educated with regard to their processes and their systems. He kills this guy and then takes off and hides. And so he just disappears. And he's afraid he's being hunted. And it's during that time he gets married. His father-in-law's name is Jethro. He just turns into a shepherd. So he goes from a palace to working out, just following sheep in the desert. And then he has this encounter with God with this burning bush.
Yep.
Right. And everything changed for him. So, and then that was at 80 years old.
Wow.
Most people are ready to retire
yes.
At 80. He has this encounter with God at 80, and God says, okay, Moses, I want you to go and set my people free. And he goes back. They go through all those plagues. They go through all those things with Pharaoh. And then they make it to the Jordan River. They're ready to go. And the spies go, no, we don't want to go. And they wander for 40 years. And Moses wanders around in the desert for 40 years, from 80 to 120, following the people around. So, on one end, you feel bad for Moses that he's not going in the promised land. On the other end, I think Moses was ready to retire.
Oh, yeah. He was like, he's like, please just show it to me. I don't think I can make this trip.
Yeah. Come on, man.
The thing that I take away from this, though, like, you and I both actually gave a message recently. I was in Imlay City. You were in Sterling Heights, and we talked about the fairness of God.
Yeah.
Like, is God fair?
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing in our human perspective. I think oftentimes we do a disservice to ourselves and to others when we project our own humanity into what we think God should do or would do, right? And there's a scenario when I read this, I'm like, man, Moses just did this one, but God isn't fair, right? And then we talked about this before, but God is incredibly unfair to our advantage, right? The way he operates. But at the same time, I just love the fact that God is very much revealing this idea that he still was a friend of him, but God took his sin seriously, his disobedience. I think it's an important reminder for us that, oftentimes when we try to really focus on the grace of God and really focus on the mercy of God, we also have to remember too that the mistakes we made, the sin we've made, actually, he takes that seriously. We see it right here lived out in the life of Moses.
Yeah, so God had promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that they would inherit the land of Canaan.
Yeah.
Now, when he promised that to them, they were a small group of people.
Yeah.
Not even, I don't even know that you could really call them much of a tribe.
Yeah.
It's, a couple hundred people. But then they go down into Egypt. For part of that time, they were extremely prosperous. Towards the end, they were in full-blown slavery and they were being oppressed, but they grew and they grew and they multiplied and they multiplied and they multiplied into, some estimates are between 1 million and 3 million people.
Yeah.
Right. So now they're a force to be reckoned with. They're slaves. They're not fighters, but still. And so now God is sending that back in, and there's these 7 major tribes: the Hivites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Philistines. And they're going to have to fight. God didn't say, I'm just going to give this land to you for, without any cost. It's going to cost you something. But now there's a lot of you. You're going to be able to, and I'm going to go ahead of you, and I'm going to fight this battle for you. So God had promised to drive out the evil people that were living in the land and to give the land to the Israelites. And God is proving to Moses once again that he's going to keep his promises. Right? I promised that this would happen, and it's going to happen. I'm not going to back down from this. And so, Moses had paid a real price. He really did work hard for over 40 years trying to lead these people. He's in his old age, and God is bringing him up, and in his goodness going, Moses, look at it.
Yeah.
You got him here.
Yeah.
The job I gave you to lead the people to the promised land, you got them here.
Yeah.
And good job. And I think there's a little bit of attaboy in this, right? But, and look at it. It is. It's a land filled with milk and honey. Look at the hills and the mountains, and look at the green oases all throughout the land. Look at the river, the water, all those things. You can see it. And I'm going to take them in. He's reaffirming once again, everything you believed is true.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important.
That's true. It is a beautiful picture of what God was doing for Moses to take him to that peak and let him see it with his own two eyes. That's the very thing that Moses was chasing after. I'm sure he had so many visions of that. Think about 40 years.
Right.
He couldn't wait to get to that point, and God wasn't just like, okay, nope, you can't enter it, can't see it. He's like, I want you to see it. Yeah. I want you to take a peek, look. It's kind of a beautiful picture of what God did.
Yeah, there's parallels with, and there is a lot in our theology and a lot in a lot of the old songs, the old hymns that we used to sing about the promised land is heaven. In a lot of those parallels, the River Jordan represents death. You're passing over, right? So there's all this promise, all this hope that's connected. And, we feel like we're wandering in the wilderness. Yeah. We're struggling. It's a hard life. There's some battles that have to be fought. There's some struggles that need to be won. But ultimately, God is going to take us into this promised land. And so that's why I think it's so special. When you read about Moses, there's a lot of different passages. In Numbers 27 is when God tells Moses, you'll see the promised land, but you're not going to go in. But then Moses pleads. He comes to God in Deuteronomy 3, and he goes, "Come on." And God said, "No, I gave you my word on this. You're not going to go in, but I'll let you see it." So then Moses accepts that in Deuteronomy chapter 3, and then goes on for the whole rest of the book, restates God's law, restates God's promises. We didn't read it. We've hinted at it in other episodes, but in chapter 30? Finally, he comes, or 31, 30. Chapter 29 and 30, God, he's renewing the covenant. Yeah. And then he finally says to the people, he said, listen, God's promises are if-then promises. If you keep his promises, if you keep his commandments, rather, God's promises are that he will bless you, that he will go before you, that he'll fight for you, that he will give you everything that he promised to do. You will prosper. You'll live long on this earth. You'll have success in everything you do. He'll give you life, the life that you really want. And then he says, and then he repeats all the exact same things, but the reverse side of them. He says, if you disobey God's commands, then God will not fight for you. Right. God will give victory to your enemies instead of you. You will always struggle. You'll have disease. Your fields won't produce. Your animals aren't going to reproduce. You're going to struggle. It's just going to be so hard. Literally, it'll be the death of everything that you're hoping for. And so when you get to chapter 30, I love that passage in chapter 30. He says, so I'm giving you a choice now between life and death. Yeah. He said, life is when you choose to go God's way. Death is going to go when you choose to go your way. There's life and death. There's a choice between blessings and cursings, he says. And then he goes, oh, that you would choose life. He's begging them, 120 years old, just choose the right way. Yeah. Don't you understand there's consequences to your choices? Obviously, when Moses gets to the promised land and doesn't get to go in, he's reminded once again there are consequences to his choices. We'll talk about that tomorrow. But God is still good, and God is still gracious in this. God does take him to the promised land. If you think of the promised land as heaven, he does. He does go on into eternity. There's worse things than not being able to cross a river, right? But he does go into the promised land that God has given him. with regard to eternity.
Yeah. And I think it's a beautiful picture of God's faithfulness. That's what, kind of what you're alluding to. It's God's faithfulness. And I just want to remind any of the listeners who are listening today that, there's, I don't like using the name it, claim it things for sure, but there's like, the saying that if God called you to it, he'll bring you through it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think there's some truth to that, that sometimes in life I've been with people and I've, talked to people who maybe they feel like, man, God called them to something, but they can't get there yet. They can't see it yet. Yeah. And there is something when you truly are listening to God and focused on his ways and trying to find his will for your life, he is a faithful God and whatever he promised in you. And it may not exactly look or play out exactly how you thought it was going to play out. But when God says he's going to do it, he follows through on his promises.
Yeah. And, when you read in Hebrews chapter 11, the Bible puts Moses in what we would call the hall of faith. Yep. Right? So we would look at it and go, oh, poor Moses. But the Bible says in, let me see if I can find it real quick. In Hebrews chapter 11, the Bible says that Moses, what verse? 13. Here's what it says. All these people died, still believing that what God had promised them. They did not receive what was promised, but they saw it all from a distance and welcomed it, right? That's what the Bible is talking about Moses here, right? That he could see it from a distance and he welcomed it. Yeah. So where you and I go, oh, God's not fair, you don't see any resentment or anger from Moses. Moses dies in faith, welcoming the fact that he could see that God was going to follow through on things. And I think that we have to have this contentment in knowing that God knows the best way and knowing that God does keep his promises and that God is good to us. And Moses died with a certain amount of contentment when it says that he was able to receive what God was promising by being able to see what God had promised. And he was content with that, and he died in faith.
And I could be wrong. It could be Abraham as well. But in that Hebrews 11, does it say that he went without knowing where he was going? Was that Moses?
That was Abraham.
Abraham, okay. Mm-hmm. And was it just that idea, though, of him just really trusting in God and going? And I think it is great to see that he is somebody who is in the Hall of Faith. Right. Even though we look at it, and you could look and say, "Oh man, what a failure! He didn't get to the finish line." No, he's in God's Hall of Faith.
Well, he's mentioned many times. Yeah. It starts off in verse 24. So I was just talking about seeing but not going in that part. Yeah. But verse 24, it starts off that by faith, Moses, when he grew up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He refused to identify on the Egyptian side, even though there was consequences. He chose to share the oppression of God's people instead of enjoying the fleeting pleasures of sin. He thought it was better to suffer for the sake of Christ than to own the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking ahead to his great reward. That's Moses.
Wow.
Looking ahead to the great reward. Yep. I'm not going to enjoy the pleasures of Egypt. I'd rather suffer for the cause of Christ with the people of Israel than to benefit from this Egyptian thing. It was by faith that Moses left the land of Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. He kept right on going because he kept his eyes on the one who's invisible. It was by faith that Moses commanded the people of Israel to keep the Passover, to sprinkle blood on the doorpost so that the angel of death would not kill their firstborn. It was by faith that the people of Israel went right through the Red Sea as though they were on dry ground. But when the Egyptians tried to follow, they were all drowned, right? There's a big chunk there that's just about
devoted
Moses.
To him,
Everybody else gets like one verse, and he gets a little chunk there. I think that there are some really great leaders in the Bible, and if you want to be a great leader, study them. But there's no greater leader in the Bible, I don't think, than Moses. Yeah. He just, on every level, was phenomenal. And so we should give Moses his kudos. Yes. Tomorrow we're going to talk about him dying, but today God showed him the promised land.
Tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, hey, that wraps it up, and we're so glad that you joined us today. We look forward to continuing this conversation through the rest of the week, and we'll see you tomorrow.
See you.